They said the fire took everything. The house, the memories, the truth. But standing in the ashes, one investigator realized something terrifying. The fire didn't destroy the evidence, it exposed it. And that alone made this case different. Because house fires are usually simple, tragic, accidental, closed. But this one refused to stay buried. And what the flames revealed would tear apart an entire investigation. It started just after 2 a.m., a quiet residential street. No traffic, no noise, most lights off. Then a glow appeared at the end of the block. Orange, flickering, growing. By the time the first 911 call came in, flames were already licking through the roof of a small, single-story house on Alder Lane. Firefighters arrived within minutes. The house was fully involved. Windows blown out, smoke pouring into the sky. Heat so intense it warped the front door. Neighbors stood barefoot in their driveways, watching in silence. Everyone assumed the same thing. Electrical fire, faulty wiring, another tragic accident. The homeowner, Mark Ellison, wasn't there. That detail didn't raise alarms at first. Mark worked night shifts, sometimes stayed with friends, sometimes didn't come home at all. Fire crews focused on containment. The house was a loss. By sunrise, all that remained was blackened wood, collapsed beams, and the smell of smoke hanging in the air. It should have ended there. But it didn't, because when investigators stepped inside the ruins later that morning, something felt wrong. Not dangerous, not obvious, just wrong. Fire investigators are trained to read damage like a map, burn patterns, heat signatures, points of origin, and almost immediately they noticed something strange. The fire hadn't spread naturally. It didn't start where it should have. Instead of beginning near the electrical panel or kitchen, the most severe damage was concentrated in the back of the house. The bedroom. That alone was unusual. Bedrooms don't usually ignite first. But then came the second problem. There were multiple burn points. Not one origin. Not two. At least three. That meant only one thing. The fire hadn't been accidental. Someone had started it. On purpose. Investigators marked the case as suspicious. Quietly. No press release. No headlines. Just a note in the report. But the strangest part still hadn't been found. Near the back wall of the bedroom, partially buried beneath collapsed debris, an investigator spotted something solid. Metal. Unburned. They cleared the ash. It was a locked fireproof safe. The kind meant to survive disasters. And it had. Perfectly. That alone raised questions. Why was there a safe in the bedroom? And what was inside? Fire crews cut it open on site. What they found inside shifted the entire investigation. Stacks of documents. Cash. And a small sealed envelope labeled with a name. Not Mark Ellison's. Someone else's. The documents appeared to be legal papers. Old ones. Some dated more than 10 years back. Others newer. And tucked beneath them, a driver's license. Not burned. Not damaged. The photos stared back at investigators. The name matched the envelope. A name that hadn't been spoken in this town in years. A name connected to a case everyone thought was already closed. The name belonged to Daniel Reese. Daniel Reese had been reported missing 8 years earlier. At the time, police believed he had left town voluntarily. No signs of struggle. No body. No evidence. After 2 years, the case quietly went cold. Then, 3 years later, Daniel Reese was declared legally dead. And 1 year after that, someone was convicted for his murder, a former acquaintance, a man named Caleb Moore. The evidence had been circumstantial, a heated argument, conflicting witness statements, a partial confession that was later recanted. But prosecutors moved forward anyway. Caleb was sentenced to life in prison. The town accepted it. They needed closure. And now, Daniel Reese's identification was sitting inside a safe in Mark Ellison's burned-down bedroom, which raised an impossible question. Why would evidence connected to a closed murder case be hidden in a house fire? And why now? The house was immediately sealed. State investigators were brought in. Forensics combed through the rubble inch by inch. They found accelerant residue, gasoline, heavy concentrations near the bedroom. Someone hadn't just started the fire. They had wanted to erase something, or someone. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Beneath the floorboards of the bedroom, hidden in a shallow crawl space, wrapped in plastic, investigators found human remains. Partial, fragmented, but unmistakable. A skull fragment, a femur, several ribs. The remains had not burned. They had been there long before the fire. Buried, hidden, preserved. Suddenly, the house fire wasn't a story anymore. The house had been hiding something for years. If these remains belonged to Daniel Reese, then Daniel Reese had never left town. And if Daniel Reese had never left town, then the man sitting in prison for his murder may have been innocent. That realization sent shockwaves through the investigation. DNA testing was ordered immediately, but results would take weeks. In the meantime, police had to confront something even more disturbing. If Daniel Reese had been buried under Mark Ellison's bedroom, what did Mark Ellison know? And where was he now? Police attempted to contact Mark Ellison. Calls went to voicemail, texts unanswered. His employer confirmed he hadn't shown up for work the night of the fire. His car was missing, so was his phone. Now the homeowner wasn't just absent, he was missing. A BOLA was issued. Search teams scoured nearby highways. Nothing. Then investigators pulled Mark's financial records. What they found only deepened the mystery. Large cash withdrawals, unexplained deposits, payments tied to legal fees, and one transaction that stood out, a wire transfer made 2 days before the fire. The recipient, a private storage facility just outside town. Police obtained a warrant. The unit was unlocked. Inside were boxes, old boxes, some marked with dates, others unlabeled, and in the very back, a duffel bag, heavy. Inside were clothes, men's clothes, and something wrapped in cloth. A handgun, registered, not to Mark Ellison, to Daniel Reese, the same Daniel Reese who had supposedly been murdered 8 years earlier. At that moment, investigators realized the truth was far worse than they imagined. The fire wasn't just an attempt to destroy evidence. It was an attempt to rewrite history. DNA results came back sooner than expected. The remains under the house belonged to Daniel Reese. Confirmed, which meant one thing. Daniel Reese had been murdered, but not by the man convicted, and not 8 years ago. He had been killed much later, which meant Caleb Moore had been serving a life sentence for a murder that hadn't even happened yet. Someone else had taken Daniel's life, and someone had framed it. But the most terrifying question still remained. Where was Mark Ellison? And was he the killer, or just another piece of a much larger cover-up? 2 days after the DNA confirmation, police received an anonymous tip. A burner phone, no caller ID, just a voice. Low, calm, certain. You're looking in the wrong place, the caller said. Mark didn't start the fire. He just finished the job. The line went dead, and before investigators could trace the call, Mark Ellison's car was found, abandoned, miles away, with signs of fire damage inside. But no body, no blood, and no answers. Because if Mark Ellison didn't start the fire, who did? And if the fire was meant to erase the truth, why did it reveal so much instead? And most chilling of all, was the real killer still out there, watching the investigation unfold? The last thing investigators expected to find beneath the collapsed staircase was a locked steel box that hadn't burned. That was the moment everything changed. Fire Captain Lewis had stared at it for a long time before calling it in. The house was destroyed. Floorboards reduced to charcoal. Family photos melted into the walls. But this box, half buried in ash, wedged between 2 beams, looked untouched. No heat warping. No soot inside the seams. It didn't belong there. And according to the homeowner's insurance records, it didn't exist. Within minutes, the scene that had been declared accidental was sealed off again. Yellow tape went back up. State investigators were called in, and the case that everyone thought ended in smoke was suddenly very much alive. When they forced the lock, The room went silent. Inside were documents wrapped in plastic, cash bundles, a burner phone, and a single USB drive taped to the lid. No family heirlooms, no emergency papers, no innocent explanation. This wasn't something someone tried to save from a fire. This was something someone expected to survive one. By the next morning, the official narrative was already cracking. Fire investigators re-walked the ruins with fresh eyes. The burn patterns didn't match an electrical failure. The fire had moved too fast in some places, too slow in others. Accelerant traces appeared where there shouldn't have been any. And the origin point? Not the kitchen, not the breaker box, not the garage. It started in the hallway, directly beneath the staircase where the steel box had been hidden. Someone hadn't just set a fire. They designed it. The house belonged to Daniel Harper, a quiet, mid-level accountant, married, no criminal record. The kind of man neighbors describe with the same phrase over and over again. He kept to himself. Daniel had been found dead inside the home. Smoke inhalation. No signs of restraint. No struggle. At least, that's what the first report said. But when the autopsy was reopened, a second examiner noticed something chilling. Daniel hadn't died from smoke. He was already dead when the fire started. Once that conclusion was reached, nothing else could be trusted. Detectives reconstructed Daniel's last 72 hours. Phone records, bank activity, CCTV footage from nearby businesses. What they found didn't just complicate the case. It blew it open. Daniel had withdrawn $42,000 in cash over 3 weeks. Small amounts, different branches, never triggering alerts. The money in the steel box matched those withdrawals exactly. But that wasn't the worst part. The burner phone inside the box had been used recently, and one number appeared again and again. Not a criminal contact, not a stranger. It belonged to Daniel's wife. Emily Harper told police she hadn't spoken to her husband the day of the fire. She said she was staying overnight at her sister's house. Phone records confirmed her location, but the burner phone told a different story. Text messages, missed calls, deleted voicemails recovered from the device. Emily hadn't just been in contact with Daniel. She'd been arguing with him. The last message Daniel sent was time-stamped 3 hours before the fire. If you burn it, you burn yourself too. No one could agree on what it meant until they opened the USB drive. The USB didn't contain photos. It contained spreadsheets, detailed ones, shell accounts, offshore transfers, client IDs that didn't belong to Daniel's firm, payment logs tied to fake charities and dissolved LLCs. Daniel Harper wasn't just an accountant. He was laundering money, millions of dollars over at least 5 years. And he wasn't working alone. The files referenced someone labeled only as EH. Investigators didn't need to ask who that was. Emily Harper had co-signed 3 of the shell companies. Her signature was everywhere. But here's the twist no one saw coming. The money wasn't coming from criminals. It was coming from law enforcement-linked sources, private security contractors, federal subcontractors, a non-profit tied to disaster relief funding. This wasn't a simple fraud case. This was a pipeline. And Daniel had apparently decided to stop it. The more detectives dug, the clearer it became. In the months before his death, Daniel had changed. Friends said he was distracted, nervous, paranoid. He'd asked odd questions about witness protection, about whistleblower laws, about what happened if you knew something you weren't supposed to know. And just 2 days before the fire, Daniel had met with a journalist. Off the record, no article published, no notes left behind, except for a single email draft recovered from Daniel's laptop backup. It was never sent. The subject line read, "If anything happens to me." The body of the email ended abruptly. They think fire cleans everything. They're wrong. When police confronted Emily with a burner phone, she didn't deny it. She just changed her story. She said Daniel had become unstable, that he was hiding money, that he talked about burning it all down if things went wrong. She claimed the steel box was his idea, his paranoia, but she couldn't explain one thing: why her fingerprints were on the inside latch. or why the accelerant used in the hallway matched a brand purchased with her credit card 2 days earlier. Emily was arrested for her questioning. She lawyered up immediately, and then something unexpected happened. Her attorney withdrew. No explanation, no public statement, just gone. That same week, the journalist Daniel had met with finally came forward. At least he tried to. He contacted police, said he had information, said Daniel had been afraid, said there were names involved that would cause problems. They scheduled a meeting. The journalist never showed up. His car was found 2 days later, abandoned at a rest stop 60 miles away. Wallet inside, phone missing, no signs of struggle, no official missing persons announcement, just silence. That's when the case stopped feeling local. Federal agencies began appearing at briefings. Certain documents were suddenly sealed. Investigators were instructed, quietly, not to pursue specific financial leads. Someone was controlling the narrative, and they were winning. The turning point came from a place no one expected. A junior forensic analyst re-examining the fire debris noticed something off about the steel box's placement. It wasn't just hidden. It was anchored, bolted into a concrete footing beneath the house, installed during construction. That meant the box hadn't been added recently. It had been planned from the beginning. The house itself had been built around it. Daniel hadn't hidden the evidence. He prepared for fire long before it ever happened. And when they cross-referenced construction permits, the contractor listed on the paperwork didn't exist. But the permit approval signature did. It belonged to a county official who'd retired 10 years earlier and who had died in a house fire of his own. Once investigators started looking, they couldn't stop seeing it. 3 fires over 12 years, all ruled accidental, all involving people connected loosely to financial oversight or audit roles, all with incomplete investigations, all with missing evidence. Except this time. This time, something survived, and that meant someone made a mistake. Late one night, long after press had moved on, a detective replayed Daniel's final voicemail from the burner phone. It was barely audible. Smoke alarms in the background. Daniel's voice shaking. He said one sentence. "If the box is still there, I did my job." The fire wasn't meant to destroy the evidence. It was meant to frame the ending. Daniel had known he wouldn't make it out, but he believed the truth would. Emily Harper has not been charged, yet the journalist remains missing. Several financial investigations have quietly closed due to lack of jurisdiction. And the steel box? It's no longer in police custody. Officially, it was transferred to federal authorities. Unofficially, no one will confirm where it is, or what was removed before the transfer. What investigators discovered next wasn't hidden in the fire. It was hidden in the people who survived it. And once one name leaked, everything went dark. The moment the name leaked, the phone stopped ringing. Not just at the precinct. Everywhere. Emails bounced back. Case files locked themselves. A federal access badge that had worked an hour earlier suddenly read invalid. And one detective, mid-sentence, was quietly pulled out of the room and told, off the record, to forget the case ever existed, because the name wasn't just familiar, it was protected. The name was Marcus Bell, and once it surfaced, the fire stopped being a story. On paper, Marcus Bell was untouchable. Former federal oversight consultant, disaster relief coordinator, advisor to multiple state agencies. His name appeared on grant approvals, emergency funding pipelines, and post-crisis audits. He was the man who showed up after chaos. Hurricanes, wildfires, infrastructure collapses. Billions of dollars moved through channels he had reviewed. And here's the part that made investigators freeze. Marcus Bell had signed off on every organization Daniel Harper flagged in his spreadsheets. Every single one. The shell nonprofits, the phantom contractors, the offshore transfers disguised as emergency allocations. Daniel hadn't stumbled into corruption. He had mapped the system. At first, no one could explain how Daniel, a mid-level accountant, ended up anywhere near Marcus Bell's orbit, until a forgotten detail resurfaced. 5 years earlier, Daniel had been hired as an external auditor on a short-term disaster recovery contract. It lasted only 3 months. No public reports, no press releases, but that contract placed Daniel directly under Marcus Bell's supervision. And something went wrong. According to internal emails recovered later, Daniel questioned a discrepancy, a missing $18 million allocation that had no destination. The response from Bell's office was short. Let it go. It's been handled. Daniel didn't let it go. He started tracking everything. And from that moment on, his life quietly began to unravel. Once Bell's name entered the case file, investigators tried to reach former colleagues. Most refused to comment. Some never answered. 2 agreed to talk, briefly. The first source, a retired compliance officer, said one sentence before hanging up. If you're asking about Bell, you're already late. The second source actually showed up to meet detectives. He was nervous, sweating. He kept checking the door. He claimed Bell ran a cleanup operation. Not murders, narratives, fires, accidents, quiet closures. Careers ended without explanation. Then the man stopped talking mid-sentence, looked past the detectives, and whispered, "I shouldn't be here." He left. 3 hours later, he emailed his resignation to a company he hadn't worked for in years and vanished. Just when the case seemed to be collapsing under pressure, something unexpected happened. An encrypted folder appeared on a secure internal server. No sender, no traceable origin, just a timestamp and a title. Bell Final Review. Inside was a video file. Low resolution, grainy, recorded on a hidden camera. It showed Daniel Harper sitting across from someone in a dim room. The date stamp placed it 3 weeks before the fire. Daniel looked exhausted, older. His hands shook. Across from him sat a man whose face was mostly in shadow, but the voice was unmistakable. Marcus Bell. Bell wasn't angry. He was calm, professional. He spoke like a man used to cleaning messes. "You don't understand the scale," Bell said. "What you're poking at doesn't end. It adapts." Daniel replied quietly. "People died." Bell paused. "People always die. The question is whether their deaths cause instability." That was the moment investigators realized something chilling. This wasn't about money. It was about control. Daniel accused Bell of orchestrating fires, controlled demolitions disguised as accidents to erase evidence, eliminate liabilities, and reset investigations. Bell didn't deny it. He leaned forward and said, "Fires are honest. They simplify." Then came the line that made the room go silent when detectives watched it later. "You should have burned with the rest." The video cut off abruptly, but it answered one major question. Daniel hadn't been killed for stealing. He had been killed for knowing too much. And the steel box? It wasn't insurance. It was a trigger. Buried in the metadata of the video was a clue, an automated release protocol. If the USB was removed or accessed, a chain of encrypted emails were deployed to multiple outlets. Most of them had been intercepted, but not all. One went through. A regional investigative journalist, small audience, low profile, published a short article late at night. No names, no accusations, just a question. Why are disaster relief audits so often followed by fires? The article was online for exactly 27 minutes. Then it disappeared. So did the journalist. Her website went offline. Social accounts deleted. Phone disconnected. But screenshots had already spread. And people started asking questions. 2 days after the leak, Emily Harper requested a meeting. No lawyer, no demands, just one condition. She wanted immunity. When prosecutors hesitated, she smiled and said, "Then enjoy your fires." Emily admitted she hadn't loved Daniel, but she hadn't killed him either. She had been recruited years earlier by Bell's network to monitor Daniel after his audit concerns raised alarms. Her job was simple. Stay close, report changes, keep him calm, until he stopped being useful. Emily didn't know Daniel would die, but she knew a fire was coming. And when Daniel told her he had hidden something that couldn't burn, she panicked. She tried to stop it. That's why she was at the house the night of the fire. That's why her fingerprints were on the latch. She tried to get the box out. She failed. Emily revealed something no one else had caught. Daniel hadn't anchored the steel box. Belle had, years before Daniel bought the house. The property had been quietly acquired by a shell company. Renovations followed, reinforcements, hidden channels, a foundation strong enough to protect one thing: evidence. Belle didn't just clean up disasters. He prepared for resistance. The house was a trap, and Daniel walked straight into it. When investigators finally traced the shell company that built the house, they uncovered something worse. The company wasn't tied to Belle. It was tied to federal internal security, which meant Belle wasn't acting alone. He was operating with permission, or at least under protection. And the fires, they weren't cover-ups. They were authorized closures. By the end of the week, the task force was disbanded. The video was classified, the server wiped. Emily transferred to a secure location. Officially, Daniel Harper died in an accidental house fire. Unofficially, everyone involved knew the truth, and they knew something else too. Daniel wasn't the first to try this. He was just the first to leave something behind that refused to burn. Months later, a single encrypted message appeared on a public forum frequented by whistleblowers. No explanation, no context, just one sentence. If you're reading this, the fires didn't work. It was posted from an account created exactly 1 hour before and deleted exactly 1 hour after. Marcus Bell has never been charged. He still advises on emergency funding, still appears at conferences, still signs off on disaster reviews. And the steel box? It was never returned. But someone, somewhere, copied its contents. Because every now and then, a fire breaks out, and someone important disappears. The next revelation didn't come from evidence. It came from a survivor. And what they revealed proved one terrifying thing. The fires were never meant to erase the truth. They were meant to test who was willing to survive it. The message wasn't supposed to be read. That was the first thing investigators realized. If you're reading this, the fires didn't work. Those 8 words detonated inside closed rooms. Because that sentence wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation. Someone survived. Someone who had been inside the system long enough to know the language. Someone who knew the fires weren't accidents. Someone who knew they were tests. And someone who was never meant to make it out. The account appeared on a whistleblower forum at 2:11 a.m. No username history. No pattern. No metadata trail. But the writing style was familiar. Short sentences. Clinical phrasing. The same tone Daniel Harper used in his spreadsheets. Within minutes, users started replying, asking questions, demanding proof. The account stayed silent. Then, exactly 47 minutes later, it posted again. Just one line: Daniel didn't die first. Then it vanished, because Daniel Harper had always been described as an anomaly, a lone accountant, a random whistleblower, a mistake. But that sentence implied a sequence, a pattern. And if Daniel wasn't first, how many came before him? And more importantly, who survived? 3 days after message, an intern at a regional records office made a mistake. She misfiled a request. Instead of rejecting it, she approved it. And a seal case, buried for a decade, briefly became visible. The name at the top stopped everyone cold. Evan Cross. Official status: deceased. Cause: industrial warehouse fire. Location: 2 states away. Year: 10 years before Daniel Harper. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Fire: no accelerant found. Evidence lost. Case closed quietly. But unlike Daniel, Evan Cross had been a field engineer. Someone who inspected disaster zones before funding was approved. Someone who flagged unsafe structures. Inflated repair costs. Contractors who never showed up. Someone who worked under Marcus Bell. Buried deep in Evan Cross's case file was a single anomaly, a hospital intake form, dated 2 days after the fire. The patient name was redacted, but the injuries were listed: smoke inhalation, second-degree burns, broken ribs, and a note scribbled at the bottom. Patient insists incident was staged. The form had been stamped invalid, but it existed, which meant Evan Cross didn't die in that fire. he disappeared. Finding Evan Cross should have been impossible. No social media, no bank activity, no digital trace. But someone left a breadcrumb. A burner phone pinged a cell tower near a decommissioned rest stop. Inside the phone was one contact, saved as fireproof, and one voicemail, never sent. The recording was distorted. Wind, static, a man breathing hard. Then a voice, older, calm, controlled. If you're hearing this, they're circling again. The fires weren't about erasing us. They were about measuring us. Who breaks? Who burns? Who stays quiet? The voice paused. Daniel didn't stay quiet. Neither did I. Then the line that changed everything. Bell doesn't choose targets. He waits for volunteers. Evan Cross wasn't hunted. Neither was Daniel Harper. They were recruited, given access, promoted, trusted, then tested. The system didn't destroy dissenters. It invited them forward, gave them just enough rope to hang themselves, or expose a structure. If they broke, they were absorbed, promoted, protected. If they didn't, fire. Evan Cross finally agreed to meet, not in person, through a relay, encrypted audio, one-time key, no video. He spoke fast. He said the steel box Daniel left behind wasn't unique. It was part of protocol. A contingency created by a group of internal auditors, engineers, and analysts who realized the same thing at different times. They called themselves nothing, but they kept a list of names. People who noticed too much. People who asked the wrong questions. People who were being tested. Daniel's name was on it. So was Evan's. And so were dozens of others. Some marked red, some yellow, some green. Green meant alive. Red meant fire. Marcus Bell wasn't the architect. He was a gatekeeper, a filter. The system existed long before him, and it didn't care who ran it as long as it ran. The fires weren't cleanups. They were exams. And the most terrifying part? Most people passed by failing. They took promotions, signed NDAs, accepted silence. The system didn't need to kill everyone, only the ones who refused to look away. Evan explained why Daniel's fire was different. Too visible, too violent, too obvious. It wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. Daniel had built something Bell couldn't control. Not evidence. A map. A way to trace how disasters, funding, fires, and silence were connected. If that map got out, the system couldn't adapt fast enough. So they burned the house, instructed everyone to watch, and dared anyone else to step forward. Someone did. A woman named Lena Morales, a mid-level emergency response coordinator. She saw the message online. If you're reading this, the fires didn't work. And she recognized the phrasing because she'd heard it before, spoken quietly in a hallway by Marcus Bell. Lena revealed the last secret. The system didn't just test the centers. It trained successors. Every generation, a few survivors were allowed to live. Not to escape, but to replace. Bell was aging, slipping. Daniel wasn't meant to expose the system. He was meant to inherit part of it. When he refused, they burned the house. And when Evan Cross survived, they watched because survivors weren't failures. They were candidates. Evan is still alive. Lena is in hiding. The list still exists. And somewhere right now, someone is being promoted, given access, shown the first crack in the system, and quietly tested. This story doesn't end with justice. It doesn't end with arrests. It doesn't end at all, because the most dangerous systems don't collapse. They evolve. And the scariest question isn't who started the fires. It's this: if you were tested, would you burn, or would you become them? The message wasn't supposed to be read. That was the first thing investigators realized. If you're reading this, the fires didn't work. Those 8 words detonated inside closed rooms. Because that sentence wasn't a threat. It was a confirmation. Someone survived. Someone who had been inside the system long enough to know the language. Someone who knew the fires weren't accidents. Someone who knew they were tests. And someone who was never meant to make it out. The account appeared on a whistleblower forum at 2:11 a.m. No username history, no pattern, no metadata trail. But the writing style was familiar. Short sentences, clinical phrasing, the same tone Daniel Harper used in his spreadsheets. Within minutes, users started replying, asking questions, demanding proof. The account stayed silent. Then, exactly 47 minutes later, it posted again. Just one line, Daniel didn't die first. Then it vanished, because Daniel Harper had always been described as an anomaly, a lone accountant, a random whistleblower, a mistake. But that sentence implied a sequence, a pattern. And if Daniel wasn't first, how many came before him? And more importantly, who survived? 3 days after the message, an intern at a regional records office made a mistake. She misfiled a request. Instead of rejecting it, she approved it. And a seal case, buried for a decade, briefly became visible. The name at the top stopped everyone cold. Evan Cross, official status, deceased. Cause, industrial warehouse fire. Location, 2 states away. Year, 10 years before Daniel Harper. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Fire, no accelerant found. Evidence lost. Case closed quietly. But unlike Daniel, Evan Cross had been a field engineer, someone who inspected disaster zones before funding was approved, someone who flagged unsafe structures, inflated repair costs, contractors who never showed up, someone who worked under Marcus Bell. Buried deep in Evan Cross's case file was a single anomaly, a hospital intake form, dated 2 days after fire. The patient name was redacted, but the injuries were listed: smoke inhalation, second-degree burns, broken ribs, and a note scribbled at the bottom. Patient insists incident was staged. The form had been stamped invalid, but it existed, which meant Evan Cross didn't die in that fire. He disappeared. Finding Evan Cross should have been impossible. No social media, no bank activity, no digital trace. But someone left a breadcrumb. A burner phone pinged a cell tower near a decommissioned rest stop. Inside the phone was one contact, saved as fireproof, and one voicemail, never sent. The recording was distorted. Wind, static, a man breathing hard. Then a voice, older, calm, controlled. If you're hearing this, they're circling again. The fires weren't about erasing us. They were about measuring us. Who breaks? Who burns? Who stays quiet? The voice paused. Daniel didn't stay quiet. Neither did I. Then the line that changed everything. Bell doesn't choose targets. He waits for volunteers. Evan Cross wasn't hunted. Neither was Daniel Harper. They were recruited, given access, promoted, trusted, then tested. The system didn't destroy dissenters. It invited them forward, gave them just enough rope to hang themselves, or expose the structure. If they broke, they were absorbed, promoted, protected. If they didn't, fire. Evan Cross finally agreed to meet, not in person, through a relay, encrypted audio, one-time key, no video. He spoke fast. He said the steel box Daniel left behind wasn't unique. It was part of protocol. A contingency created by a group of internal auditors, engineers, and analysts who realized the same thing at different times. They called themselves nothing, but they kept a list of names. People who noticed too much, people who asked the wrong questions, people who were being tested. Daniel's name was on it, so was Evan's, and so were dozens of others. Some marked red, some yellow, some green. Green meant alive, red meant fire. Marcus Bell wasn't the architect. He was a gatekeeper, a filter. The system existed long before him, and it didn't care who ran it, as long as it ran. The fires weren't cleanups. They were exams. And the most terrifying part? Most people passed by failing. They took promotions, signed NDAs, accepted silence. The system didn't need to kill everyone, only the ones who refused to look away. Evan explained why Daniel's fire was different. Too visible, too violent, too obvious. It wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. Daniel had built something Bell couldn't control. Not evidence. A map, a way to trace how disasters, funding, fires, and silence were connected. If that map got out, the system couldn't adapt fast enough. So they burned the house, instructed everyone to watch, and dared anyone else to step forward. Someone did. A woman named Lena Morales, a mid-level emergency response coordinator. She saw the message online. If you're reading this, the fires didn't work. And she recognized the phrasing because she'd heard it before, spoken quietly in a hallway by Marcus Bell. Lena revealed the last secret. The system didn't just test the centers. It trained successors. Every generation, a few survivors were allowed to live, not to escape, but to replace. Bell was aging, slipping. Daniel wasn't meant to expose the system. He was meant to inherit part of it. When he refused, they burned the house. And when Evan Cross survived, they watched because survivors weren't failures. They were candidates. Evan is still alive. Lena is in hiding. The list still exists. And somewhere right now, someone is being promoted, given access, shown the first crack in the system, and quietly tested. This story doesn't end with justice. It doesn't end with arrests. It doesn't end at all, because the most dangerous systems don't collapse. They evolve. And the scariest question isn't who started the fires. It's this: if you were tested, would you burn, or would you become them? The last line from Evan Cross didn't fade. It echoed: if you were tested, would you burn, or would you become them? Because less than 12 hours after that message surfaced, another fire broke out. This one wasn't a house. It was a records facility, a private archive warehouse on the outskirts of Grayfield County. No residents, no neighbors, no reason for anyone to be inside at 3:17 a.m., except someone was. Because when firefighters forced the side door open, they found a body, alive, barely. She couldn't speak at first. Smoke damage, collapsed lung, hands burned raw, but she kept trying to write. On a soot-covered clipboard, with a shaking finger, she scrawled 4 words before passing out. I was being watched. Her name was Marissa Klein, and she wasn't on the list. At least, she wasn't supposed to be. Marissa wasn't an engineer. She wasn't an auditor. She wasn't even a whistleblower. She was a records digitization contractor. Someone hired to scan old paper files into cloud storage. Low clearance, temporary badge, no access to decision-making, which raised a terrifying question. If she wasn't being tested, why did they try to burn her? While Marissa lay sedated in intensive care, investigators reviewed her workstation. One scanned folder had been opened at 2:46 a.m. Not uploaded, not shared, just opened. Its label was harmless. Fire loss assessments closed. Inside were hundreds of PDFs, all related to fires, different cities, different years, different circumstances, but the language was identical. Same phrasing, same structure, same conclusions, even when causes were supposedly different. Electrical fault, gas leak, unknown origin. The conclusions never changed. Total loss unavoidable. No negligence detected. Every time, buried deep in the metadata, was something no one noticed at first. A column labeled response compliance, with entries like pass fail pending, next to names, human names, Daniel Harper, fail Evan Cross, fail Marissa Klein, pending. Marissa wasn't meant to die immediately. She was still under evaluation. That meant one thing. Someone wanted to see what she'd do next. At 6:12 p.m., hospital security logged a visitor. Male, late 50s. Suit, no badge. He gave a name. Marcus Bell. He was waved through because the system still recognized him. Marissa regained consciousness briefly, just long enough to hear him, just long enough to remember. She would later tell investigators. He leaned close and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see the column." Then he smiled. "But now we'll see what you do with it." They assumed Marissa was afraid. She wasn't. She was angry, and unlike Daniel, She didn't work alone. Before the fire, Marissa had done something instinctively. She copied the folder, not to a USB, not to email, but to a mirror server, a private redundancy system used by archivists to prevent data loss. It auto-synced every 6 minutes, which meant the moment the fire started, the files were already somewhere else. At 11:43 p.m., an anonymous drop appeared on 3 platforms simultaneously. No commentary, no manifesto, just raw files, fire reports, compliance columns, names, hundreds of them. Journalists didn't know what they were looking at, but engineers did, auditors did, and so did people who had lost someone in a fire that never made sense. It took less than 2 hours. A woman in Oregon recognized her brother's name. A man in Florida recognized his wife's. A retired firefighter recognized the phrasing. He posted one sentence that went viral. These reports were written before the fires happened. That statement cracked the system open, because if the conclusions existed before the fires, then the fires weren't accidents. They were scheduled. Hidden inside the dump was another sheet, password protected, cracked within minutes. It was titled Successors. This list didn't mark who failed. It marked who advanced. Names with notes beside them. Handled incident professionally. Demonstrated discretion. Prioritized organizational stability. Marcus Bell's name was there. So were judges, fire chiefs, insurance executives, people the public trusted, people who passed. The system wasn't hiding crimes. It was training leadership. Disasters weren't collateral. They were curriculum. Who could authorize loss, who could ignore screams, who could sign off and sleep anyway. That was the test. And society had been unknowingly promoting the ones who passed. You'd think exposure would end it. It didn't, because the system had one final safeguard: plausible denial. Every decision was technically legal. Every fire could be explained. Every signature was valid. No single person caused the deaths. They only allowed them against medical advice. Marissa recorded a statement. Her voice was hoarse, her hands bandaged, but her words were clear. They don't kill everyone. They don't have to. They just reward the ones who don't ask questions. Then she did what Daniel never got the chance to do. She named names. Arrests were made, not for murder, for fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, small charges, enough to expose, not enough to dismantle. Marcus Bell vanished. His last known location? A private flight. Destination unknown. The system didn't end. It fractured. Pieces of it still exist, operating quietly, legally, waiting. Because as long as disasters can be justified, as long as loss can be explained, as long as silence can be rewarded, the test continues. This case isn't about fire. It's about permission. Who we allow to decide what's acceptable, who we promote for staying quiet, and who we punish for refusing to look away. Because the real horror isn't that the system existed, it's that many people passed. And tonight, somewhere, someone is being evaluated. They don't know it yet, but they're already inside the test. It didn't end with exposure. It reacted. Because 48 hours after the files went public, after names trended, after families recognized patterns they'd been told were coincidences, the system made its move. At 6:09 a.m., every major outlet covering the story received the same legal notice, same wording, same formatting, same sender. A shell nonprofit called the Continuity Alliance. The demand was simple: remove all documents obtained illegally or face immediate litigation. What shocked journalists wasn't the threat. It was the confidence, because the Alliance didn't deny the files, didn't dispute authenticity. They claimed something worse. They claimed authorization. Buried on page 12 of the filing was a sentence that made editors go quiet. The disclosed materials were generated under a federally sanctioned contingency framework enacted under emergency governance provisions. Emergency governance, which meant one thing: the system wasn't rogue. It was approved. Investigators scrambled. So did legal analysts. Within hours, someone found it. A post 9/11. Error provision passed quietly. renewed every 4 years, never debated publicly. Its language was vague, its scope unlimited. It allowed private-public partnerships to simulate catastrophic scenarios, to test institutional resilience, to identify leadership under pressure, the fires, the disappearances, the acceptable losses. They weren't crimes under that framework. They were exercises. She laughed, a dry, broken sound that startled her doctors, because authorization didn't explain one thing. The column, the one labeled response compliance, that wasn't about resilience. It was about obedience. As journalists were forced to redact documents, one independent outlet delayed compliance, just long enough to publish a final screenshot, a partial list, blacked out names, except one, a name no one expected. Marissa Klein, pass. The internet froze. How could she pass? She leaked the files. She spoke publicly. She named names, which meant either the system was incompetent or passing didn't mean what everyone thought it meant. Marissa understood it before anyone else. From her hospital bed, she requested a call, not to police, not to media, to a retired systems architect named Jonah Reed, a man who'd once designed crisis simulations for the government, a man who quit without explanation. When Jonah saw the screenshot, he went pale. Then he said 5 words that changed everything. They don't test silence. They test containment. The system didn't want quiet people. It wanted controlled opposition. People who could leak without collapsing institutions, expose without causing revolt, release truth slowly, safely, on their terms. Daniel Harper failed because he hesitated. Evan Cross failed because he threatened chaos. Marissa passed because, even under fire, she acted methodically. She documented. She mirrored. She released evidence without telling people what to do. She let the system absorb the shock. She proved she could handle truth without destabilizing the structure. That was the test. At 2:11 a.m., Marissa's phone vibrated. A blocked number. A voice she recognized instantly. Marcus Bell. Alive. Calm. Unhurried. "Congratulations," he said. "You did better than most." She said nothing. He continued. "You think you exposed us. What you actually did was apply." He sent an address. A time. No threat. No pressure. Just a statement. If you don't come, the narrative continues without you. That was the trap. Because now Marissa understood the truth. Walking away didn't stop the system. It just removed her from the room. The address led to an unmarked facility buried beneath a decommissioned data center. No guards. No signs. Inside were people she recognized from the list. Not villains. Professionals. Decision makers. All watching a wall of screens. Live feeds. Wildfires. Flood zones. Infrastructure failures. Every screen labeled with one word. Simulation. Marcus stood beside her, older than she remembered, tired. "We don't start disasters," he said. "We choose which ones to respond to." He explained it plainly. The world produces endless crises. Resources are limited. Someone decides which fires get fought, which towns get rebuilt, which deaths become statistics. The system didn't cause tragedies. It filtered compassion, and it rewarded those who could live with the math. Marissa asked a question that had haunted everything. Marcus didn't hesitate. He hesitated too long. Daniel saw the projection, saw which fire wouldn't be contained, and he froze. In this system, hesitation was failure. Marcus gestured to the screens. A new simulation blinked red. A real-time wildfire. Small town. Limited resources. Evacuation possible, but not for everyone. "What would you authorize?" he asked. That was the test. Not obedience. Choice. She didn't answer. Instead, she did something no one ever had. She reached for the console and hit release all. Every simulation, every projection, every model. Public, unfiltered, global. Alert screamed. Executives shouted. Marcus stared in disbelief, because the system relied on one assumption, that the public couldn't handle the truth. That knowledge would cause panic, but panic didn't come. Something else did. Debate, anger, participation. Communities began organizing before authorities acted. Volunteers moved faster than simulations predicted. The math broke. The facility was shut down, not by police, by executive order, framed as restructuring. No trials, no convictions, just silence. But this time it was different, because millions had seen the models. They knew what was being decided without them. She disappeared. Not burned, not erased, just gone. Some say she was offered protection. Others believe she chose anonymity. One rumor persists, that she's building something new, a system where decisions are visible, shared, messy, human. The system didn't end because it was exposed. It ended because someone refused to choose in the dark. If you're listening to this story, you were never just an observer. You were always part of the equation. The only difference now is that you know the test exists, and the next decision might be yours. The moment Marissa hit release all, the world didn't explode. It cracked, quietly at first, then everywhere at once. Because within minutes, people weren't just watching the simulations. They were recognizing themselves in them. It wasn't Marissa. It wasn't Marcus Bell. It was a town, a small town in Ohio, Riverton, because buried inside the release files was a model labeled Riverton Fire, Containment Failure, Acceptable Loss, 214. That number wasn't abstract anymore. It was people. Local reporters in Riverton dug fast, too fast. They matched dates, weather records, emergency response logs, and then they found it. A warehouse fire from 8 years earlier, officially ruled an accident. Unofficially, fire crews had been redirected that night, sent to a different part of the county for a training exercise. 214 people died, the exact number in the simulation. Acceptable, that was the word that broke everything, because now people understood. These weren't predictions, they were decisions. Within hours, a joint statement was released, carefully worded, emotionless. The disclosed materials represent theoretical exercises, not operational directives. But then someone noticed something chilling, a timestamp. One simulation file had been updated 3 days after the Riverton fire, with one line added, outcome confirmed. While the world argued online, something else happened. Another fire, this one in Arizona. Wildland, fast-moving. Early evacuation recommended, but not ordered. The release model for that region had predicted. Public panic outweighs loss prevention. The response followed the model, and people noticed. This time lived. It didn't wait for permission. Social media lit up with evacuation maps. Community leaders bypassed officials. Buses moved before orders were issued. Local pilots flew supplies. The model predicted chaos. What happened instead was coordination. The fire still burned, but casualties were a fraction of what the system projected. And that exposed the biggest lie of all. Not morally, mathematically. Its core assumption, that people would panic, was outdated. It had never been updated, because panic was convenient. It justified control. 24 hours after the Arizona fire, Marcus Bell vanished. Not resigned, not arrested, gone. His apartment was empty. No devices, no paper, no forwarding address. But he left something behind. A single encrypted message addressed to Marissa. It was short and terrifying. You were never the variable. The public was. And now they're awake. Journalists digging into Marcus's past found something impossible. He didn't exist before 2003. No birth records, no school transcripts, no early employment. Marcus Bell wasn't a man. He was a role, passed from person to person, a custodian of the system, which meant something else. Someone else had taken the role. 3 days later, a new entity registered quietly, a new nonprofit, new board, new language, different name, same structure, the Equilibrium Initiative, same servers, Same simulation engine, rebranded. Against her will, Marissa's last known coordinates surfaced. A rural town in Oregon. Population, 1,102. No internet hub, no press, just forest and a weather alert. Heavy rain, landslide risk. The equilibrium model for the region had just updated. Evacuation probability, low loss tolerance, moderate. The system was testing again. Independent reporters moved first. Not officials, not police, because now they knew if a crisis appeared in the model, it might already be decided. They reached the town before any alerts were issued. They warned residents, showed them the files, the model, the math. The town evacuated itself. Hours later, the landslide hit, houses destroyed, no deaths. The model failed again. This time it was real panic. Inside, equilibrium. Internal emails leaked. Executives argued. The models were no longer predictive. Too many variables. Too much transparency. The system required ignorance. And ignorance was gone. A whistleblower from inside equilibrium finally spoke. Not anonymously, publicly, on camera. She revealed the origin. The system wasn't built to manage disasters. It was built to manage blame. To decide in advance where outrage would be survivable, where deaths wouldn't destabilize power. It wasn't about saving the most lives. It was about preserving the structure. Marissa wasn't an anomaly. She was a final test. If even full transparency didn't cause collapse, the system would adapt. If it did, the system would shut down and reset. Her release forced a fork, and the outcome terrified them. Equilibrium issued a statement. They announced a full shutdown, effective immediately. All simulations archived. All operations ceased. It looked like victory, but Marissa knew better. Systems don't die, they fragment. Before the shutdown completed, one final file appeared online. No label, no author, just coordinates. And a date, 2 weeks in the future. Some believe it's a warning. Others think it's a threat. A few fear it's something worse. A test without oversight, without containment, without anyone left to say acceptable. Marissa hasn't spoken since. The system is officially gone, but disasters are still coming. And now there's no filter, no math, no one deciding in advance. Was the system evil, or was it a mirror? Because now the choices are visible, shared, ours. The fire revealed something investigators never expected. Not a crime, not a conspiracy, but a question humanity has never answered. Who decides what we're willing to lose? And what happens when no one is deciding anymore? The coordinates appeared without explanation. No logo, no letterhead, no signature, just numbers, latitude, longitude, and a date 14 days away. The internet froze, because anyone who had followed the case knew what that meant. The system never posted coordinates unless something was coming. The coordinates pointed to one location, a stretch of land in the Midwest, rural, isolated, quiet, a town called Ashford Ridge. Population, 842. No history of disasters, no major infrastructure, no reason to matter, which made it terrifying. Because every place that ever showed up in the models had one thing in common. Something was about to happen. Journalists moved first, then independent researchers, then civilians. Ashford Ridge suddenly found itself flooded with strangers asking questions no one could answer. Local officials checked records. No warnings, no alerts, no pending emergencies. On paper, nothing was wrong. But online, the countdown had already started. A data analyst named Eli Ramos noticed something subtle. The coordinates weren't centered on the town. They pointed just outside it, to a long-abandoned industrial site, a concrete structure built in the 1960s, decommissioned decades ago, officially empty. Unofficially, no one had checked in years. Then the final leak surfaced. A single document uploaded anonymously, just one page. At the top, a familiar phrase. Acceptable loss threshold. But this time, the number was missing. Instead, there was a word, Undefined. That had never happened before. The system always calculated a number, always decided. Undefined meant something had changed, or something had gone wrong. 7 days before the date. One post. No caption, just a photo, a blurry image of trees, and a sentence typed beneath it. If the system can't decide, someone else will. The internet erupted, because that wasn't a warning. It was a confirmation. Old blueprints surfaced. The industrial site wasn't just a warehouse. It was part of a Cold War-era contingency program, a subterranean facility designed to house decision-makers during national emergencies, a place where simulations weren't theoretical. They were rehearsed. And there was something else, a sealed chamber, marked in the blueprints as ethical override. No explanation, no documentation, just a room. 3 nights before the date, power went out across Ashford Ridge. Not a blackout, a controlled shutdown. Cell service dropped. Internet went dark, but one signal remained. A local radio frequency began broadcasting a loop. A woman's voice, calm, measured, familiar. It was Marissa. This is not a warning. This is a demonstration. No one is in danger unless you ignore this. She explained it plainly. The system had always assumed centralized decision-making was necessary, that someone had to choose who was saved, who was lost. What the models never tested was what happened if everyone had the data. Ashford Ridge wasn't a target. It was a stage. The underground facility housed the last intact version of the simulation engine, the original, unrestricted, unfiltered. Marissa had accessed it, and she wasn't going to shut it down. She was going to turn it on for everyone. Experts panicked. Politicians demanded the broadcast stop, because if the engine went live, every projection would be visible, every future risk, every calculated loss, pandemics, infrastructure failures, economic collapses, all of it in real time. The fear wasn't chaos. The fear was accountability. As the date approached, people gathered, not in Ashford Ridge, everywhere. Screens set up in public spaces, community centers, universities, living rooms, waiting, because Marissa promised one thing: no more decisions in the dark. 1 hour before activation, a new file appeared, authored, signed, stamped by the federal government. It acknowledged the system, confirmed its existence, and claimed responsibility. But the final line shattered everything. We did not create the ethical override. We found it. The system wasn't designed by modern governments. It predated them, an inherited mechanism, passed down, used, expanded, never questioned. No one knew who built it or why. As the countdown reached 0, Marissa's voice returned. This ends tonight, one way or another. The stream cut. The world waited. The engine never went fully online, but it didn't shut down either. Instead, fragments began appearing. Partial models, localized projections, enough to change behavior, enough to change outcomes, enough to make one thing clear. The system is no longer centralized, and it's no longer controlled. Because now the question isn't who decides what we lose. It's this: what happens when everyone can see the future, and no one agrees on what to save?